what you're reading about there, Billy.
I'm reading about the Saxons.
The Anglo Saxons, huh? You know, they were a very interesting people. The Anglo Saxons were actually a group of 4 different peoples from mainland Europe. They sailed to modern-day Britain, where they settled and began farming, and would lay down the foundations for what would become one of the most powerful civilizations in the world.
Wow, really?
And to think, it all started from a bunch of tribal barbarians.
Who were the Anglo Saxons? In the 5th century AD, around the fall of Rome, the British Isles were ripe for the picking, and were only inhabited by the Aboriginal Celts and Picts. The original invaders from Denmark and Germany came seeking plunder first, but later sought to take the land, which was much better for farming. These invaders were the Jutes from northern Denmark, the Angles from southern Denmark, the Saxons from northern Germany, and the Frisians from the Netherlands. These peoples traveled in rowboats and longboats across the North Sea. When Rome was being sacked, the Roman armies fell back from their posts in Britain, allowing for the Anglo-Saxons to invade the defenseless Celts with ease.
And who was responsible for the fall of Rome? By the Germanic tribes of Europe, of course. Some of which were most likely the Anglo-Saxons.
The invasion of Britain forced the Celts back into Ireland, while the Picts were driven into Wales and eventually conquered by the Saxons and Celts. Once they settled into the land, it was divided into kingdoms. These kingdoms were ruled over by the varying kings of the land. They stood as the highest authority. Other than the king, there were witens. These witens served the king by advising him on important decisions and decrees. These might include lawmaking or warfare. They were composed of the highest and most prestigious nobles. The witens were also commonly known as thanes. The laws they helped create were often put into place to stop people from killing others out of revenge. If someone killed another person, they would often be chased down by the murdered man's family, turned into a lawman, and forced to pay a large fine, or wergild, to the victim's family. The price of the wergild depended on the social standing of the victim's family. The higher the class, the higher the fine would be. If one could not pay the fine, they would be sold into slavery. If a slave committed a crime, they would face capital punishment, flogging, or be put in stocks. These laws were administered by the ealdormen, who often had sheriffs below them. Sheriffs supervised public meetings, witnessed transactions, saw that criminals were dealt with, rallied men to battle in times of war, and sought to stabilize society.
Actually managed to develop their own form of currency, consisting of silver pennies, called shillings. This was most likely adapted from the Roman times, when they used coin currency, as early Anglo-Saxons used a simple bartering system. But the development of currency is truly amazing. I guess you could say it really changed the times.
The kings of Anglo-Saxony ruled over 7 different kingdoms that were constantly warring and ever-changing the face of Britain. These kingdoms included East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Mercia, Northumbria, Sussex, and Wessex. The most important king of these kingdoms was Alfred the Great, who united the kingdoms against a common foe, the Vikings. Alfred called the land he ruled over Angleland, or Land of the Angles. In Anglo-Saxon society, there were two main divisions, the freemen and the slaves. The freemen could own land and money, but also had obligations to the king, such as military service. The freemen were divided into two classes: thanes, such as the noble Witens, and churls. Thanes were the upper class members of society, while churls made up the lower class. Churls were often tied to a thane's hide or field. One hide was enough to feed one family when farmed. Thanes owned at least 5 of these hides and would provide for their serving churls. Slaves, however, got the short end of the stick in society. They were property to be bought and sold, controlled and often treated badly by their masters. They had no protection under the law and couldn't leave their masters unless sold or set free. The majority of slaves were owned by thanes, as churls could rarely afford them. Slaves were often used for farm labor. However, not all Saxons were farmers. Quite a few people were craftsmen, tradespeople, and hunters. Most jobs were in agriculture and animal husbandry, but when they weren't working, chances are they were at the local meat hall. These were the social centers for the Saxon people. It was where they swore oaths to lords and boasted their strength. Saxons loved to drink as well. Many rituals and celebrations involved drinking, usually in copious amounts. Other leisure activities involved feasting, music, poetry, dancing, and theatricals. Usually all in the same place, the mead hall. Games such as animal racing, dice games, board games, and chess were also common. Everyone enjoyed these games, and it wasn't just for the boys. In fact, women had a considerable amount of freedom in Anglo-Saxon society. Women were entitled to the same war guild as men of the same social standing. They had the right to defend themselves in court against false claims and offenses. Offenses such as sexual assault, which were considered one of the worst crimes possible. Unlike women in these civilizations, women could own land. Also, women in Anglo-Saxon times held many basic human rights. On top of this, females could also have multiple husbands. There were no rules against divorce. Now, work and play weren't the only thing the Saxons concerned themselves with. Much like every other civilization, religion played a major part of their lives. Most Saxons subscribed to a form of Germanic paganism adapted to their own needs. They believed in many gods, like the polytheistic Greek and Roman religion. The most important of these gods were Woden, god of wisdom and discovery; Thunor, the son of Woden, and the god of lightning, thunder, and storms; 2, the god of war, combat, and the sky; and Frigg, the patron goddess of women, and the goddess of marriage, earth, home, and harvest. Frigg was also the wife of Woden. A holdover from paganism has survived in our calendar. Monday, Moon Day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Woden's Day, Thursday, Thunor's Day, Friday, Frisia's Day, Saturday, Saturn Day, and Sunday, Sunday. A major difference between Saxon and the original Germanic paganism was the Saxons' more lenient views on sacrifice. They did practice ritual sacrifice, however, though only on animals and inanimate objects, rather than humans. They also held many odd superstitious beliefs, such as beliefs in elves, dragons, goblins, and trolls. They left many areas uninhabited due to the fear of supernatural creatures. One particular belief was that you got sick from being shot by an elf's arrow. They also followed magic and shamanistic beliefs. Many of these beliefs were stomped out as Christianity arrived with St. Augustine and quickly took over as the main religion. Because of Christianity's suppression, much about paganism has been lost to modern historians. The Anglo Saxons contributed much to civilization and society. Some notable contributions were that England was settled and laid out by the Saxons. Modern borders in England are actually almost unchanged since Anglo-Saxon times. It was the Anglo-Saxons who laid the foundation for what would later become one of the most powerful and influential countries in the world. Many traditional English names can be traced back to Saxon roots, along with much of the English language. They also contributed lots of rich culture. Many of their poems, folklore, and stories have survived to this day, and have served as an inspiration for writers of modern fantasy. Another contribution of the Anglo-Saxons was in agriculture. It was they who managed to break the hard, harsh earth of Britain and cultivate it and farm. They used ards, or scratch plows, and later proper plows when preparing land for planting. The Saxons were also well experienced in animal husbandry, using many animals like cattle, pigs, goats, and geese as sources of food and cooking fat, and even oxen for pulling plows. They also bred many of their animals to be smaller than those found in the rest of Europe. Many works of art also survive from this time. Saxons were highly skilled metalworkers, jewelers, embroiderers, and wrote many beautiful examples of illuminated manuscripts. One of the most famous examples of Saxon art is the renowned Bayeux Tapestry, a 230-foot-long embroidered cloth depicting many events leading up to and during the Norman invasion of Britain, culminating in the Battle of Hastings, where Saxons lost to the invading Normans. After the Norman invasion of Angleland, the Saxons found themselves in an interesting position in history. In time, the Normans would be absorbed into their culture, and what would become Britain would live on independent of what would become France. Though the Saxons would never be recognized under that name again, much of their culture survived past their defeats, and the Normans and their descendants would only build upon the foundations of the Saxons, rather than starting anew completely. The English language and many of the English monarchs had their roots from Saxons. Angleland would eventually become England, and would continue to thrive. 4 Germanic tribes from mainland Europe sailed to a large northern island, abandoned by the Romans after their fall from grace. They made their journey in longboats, braving the waters of the North Sea, searching for a new home. When they found land, they built their homes and began farming. Hardship awaited them in this new land, and they faced it head-on and triumphed. In time, they would grow to become one of the most powerful nations in world history.
Her favorite part of the Anglo Saxons, Billy?
Stormed.
3 hours ago. Billy, answer the question, Billy. Answer the. What was your favorite? No, Billy, you forgot your backpack. Billy? Billy?